Thank you for joining us live and over on YouTube. It's exciting. This is our fifth session in this series, and it's been such a pleasure to go on this journey with you folks. Today, we're going to be looking at exporting to the continent of Africa, which is a big place, and we're very fortunate to have some fantastic folks joining us today that have experience working in different regions there. I'll just do a quick introduction of who we have joining us here. Hind El Ouardi is a newcomer to Canada. She was born and raised in Morocco and worked in different capacities for Hiba Foundation, Maroc Cultures, Gnawa, and CasaMusic, among other arts organizations and festivals in Morocco. She was also involved in a number of projects, including the Moroccan Music Export Office and African and Middle Eastern Music Conference Visa for Music. Nadine McNulty has contributed to the development and growth of African music and culture in Toronto over a period of 25 years. Nadine is an arts consultant and the artistic director of Batuki Music Society, which is a not-for-profit African arts organization dedicated to nurturing and strengthening cultural diversity through music and the arts. Batuki Music Society promotes African music and culture through performance, film, workshop, and events throughout the year, as well as the annual Habari Africa Festival. Nadine is also the producer and host of Karibuni music program, aired weekly on CIUT 89.5 FM, which is a broadcast dedicated to promoting African music ranging from traditional to contemporary forms. Welcome, Nadine, and welcome, Hind. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So I'd love to start by asking each of you if you can give us a little overview of the countries or regions in Africa that that you kind of specialize in, or that you've been working in, and a little bit about your experience in those places. Hind, can we start with you?
Sure. So I worked in production for big festivals such as Mawazine and the Festival of Casablanca and Gnawa, also for smaller organizations and initiatives such as Matango and Festival Altar. I'm only mentioning Mawazine several times because, we had big names, Jennifer Lopez, The Weeknd, Stevie Wonder, but also Angelique Kidjo, Oumou Sangare from the African continent as well. And I worked with Hiba Foundation in communications and in programming. So I was the director of their Theatre Renaissance in Rabat. And I worked on helping local artists to promote the music nationally and internationally. So I worked on Hiba Rec, which was a recording program that we had at the foundation. I also worked on the Moroccan Music Export, which helped artists to perform abroad, and on Visa for Music. And just to give you an idea about what is Visa for Music, it's a 4-day music market for Africa and Middle East. So it has speed meetings, like exhibition stands, conferences and showcases. And they promoted the event nationally, internationally, just to spread the word about the call for applications for artists to apply to perform, but also for delegates to, come and see the amazing artists that we bring. So I attended several music festivals, but also conferences. So I did WOMEX several times. Porto Musical in Brazil, Roskilde in Denmark, Babel Med in France, Massa in Ivory Coast, Atlantic Music Export in Cape Verde, etc. Just mentioning some of them. And I toured with Moroccan bands, but also with artists from the region, nationally and internationally. And Hiba Foundation also had like a workshop or residency that we were able to develop in partnership with local festivals and delegations, international delegations in Morocco. So we had workshops with the Brazilian band Bichiga 70, with Mawazin Festival. We had a masterclass with Anwar Brahim, with Casablanca, like a masterclass with Harry Hancock, with US Embassy, just, to give a kind of also an idea about the scene in Morocco. So I would say I mainly worked in Morocco, and I had a few experiences in West Africa, mainly the Francophone region.
Thank you, Hind. How about you, Nadine?
Okay, I'll go back a few years, starting out in Kenya, working with artists in Kenya, as well as working at the time. Polygram was moving over to Sony. And I worked with many bands there, but it was mostly a lot of Congolese musicians, people like Kanda Bongo Man and other people like that. I also worked at that time, I was a freelance photographer, but I started working in arts there and also here in Canada pretty well at the same time. That was many years ago. I was the artistic director for Music Africa and Afrofest for a number of years, for I think 12 years, 13 years. And my experience mostly what started in East Africa. I've also attended many conferences in Africa, including conferences such as Hind was mentioning, like Massa, and also ones in Europe. I attended also the Cap Verde, the Atlantic Music Expo, and also in Womex for many years and other conferences around the world that dealt primarily with music from around the globe. And my experience, I would say I've been in quite a few African countries, mostly in East Africa, throughout the whole region. Also Ethiopia. I have experience in Ethiopia working on a few years ago. I worked on a concert at the Millennium Hall, which is one of the largest venues in Addis Ababa. I'm also planning, hopefully, to be back there in November for another concert. My experience in Canada was quite extensive in African music. I've worked with most of the African artists based across the country in many capacities, not just as a presenter, also as a producer. I've curated a lot of concerts and shows, and throughout Africa, I've traveled a lot in many of the countries and have kind of a general knowledge, mostly of the East and Central African region, as well as a little bit of the West, and of course, a little bit in North Africa, also Morocco and Tunisia, but not all that much. And I have been in South Africa, Southern African region, and also in Namibia, which is in the Southern African region. So my experience is pretty broad-based, but primarily as a presenter, as a curator of music and a producer. And also I've worked with many bands touring and things like that. So that's just, and also as a radio producer and host.
Thank you. So both of you mentioned quite a few like conferences and festivals. I know that different ones will be open to artists from different regions. Are there any that are open to Canadian artists to apply to, that someone from Canada, an artist from Canada, could apply to go showcase in Africa?
Absolutely. I just recently attended one about 3 weeks ago, a month ago in Tanzania, Sauti Busara, and there was an artist from Canada performing there, Nax Bitota from Montreal. She had just recently performed for us here in Toronto at Alliance Francaise, and the next week, we were both over in Tanzania and she was performing there. So there are opportunities there. There was also a Canadian band at Massa in Ivory Coast, Abidjan. And I'm sure Hind can also attest to many other conferences in Africa where Canadian musicians have been there, and there have been folk artists, there's been artists of all different types of genres.
Yeah, just add on to what you were saying. The Brooks also played in Visa for Music a few years ago, and they were able to tour after that in Morocco. So they came back after the following year to tour in Morocco. So definitely, yes.
Yeah, there was a couple from Quebec, I believe. I think Mohamed Debou and those guys, the Moroccans, they're based in Canada, went back there to perform, which is amazing. So I believe there are opportunities. There's also recently, about a year or so ago, South African Music Week started up in South Africa, and they're aligned with the Canadian Music Week. And so they're also connecting, and I believe they did have some Canadian artists even in their first year, and that's absolutely a possibility for artists and folk artists especially, because there is a lot of folk music in Africa. I think you and I were talking about that the other day, Rosalyn, how people term African music in two categories, either traditional or contemporary, but a lot of music from Africa is folk music. It's storytelling, it's, singer-songwriter music, things like that. And there are hundreds and hundreds of different genres of music in Africa. They just have different names than what they are called here within Canada.
It's neat. So, how would you recommend an artist, um, begin to approach entering into markets in Africa. Would you recommend would it be, go to a conference, meet people there, or are there other ways to kind of break into the market or start building audience or connections there for folks who haven't been before?
I think Africa is a big continent, so I think just to give an idea about how Morocco works, so we have several festivals throughout the year, but mainly in summer. Some of them are produced by private organizations or associations. Some of them are sponsored by the private sector. Some of them are funded by the government, like Ministry of Culture, like the tourism or the city. And some of them are, funded by foreign delegation, like the French Institute or other organizations and representations. So they have different, business models. So some of them are for free, some of them are ticketed, some of them are a combination of both. So like for Belazine, for example, you have like the front area, the venue is ticketed and the back is, free. So they have combinations. Some of them have stations for free and some of them are ticketed. So it's just good to know, what to expect. I would say specifically for Morocco, it's a good start to go to a conference. Also, I would suggest if you are already performing somewhere else, close to Morocco. Morocco is in North Africa. It's the closest to Spain and to Europe. So my recommendation would be, if you're already touring or performing elsewhere in Europe, try to find the dates in Morocco. It can be a festival, it can be a venue, even if there are not loads of them, but you might be able to find a date. It will be cheaper, it will be more convenient, less time to travel, and it will give you an idea about how is the scene, who are the main actors, what can you perform, and what are the other possibilities. This might be like a window for you to go to West Africa. There are a lot of direct flights from Casablanca, which is the economic capital of Morocco. So there are direct flights to Bamako, Abidjan, Praia. So you'll be able to travel to West Africa easily if you have already a date, like an anchor date in Morocco. So that would be my suggestion. Another good idea would be also to work on residencies or workshops with local artists. This helps you like first, to know local artists and, get more information about the scene, etc. But also to promote your show if you are performing in the country, through the fan base. That's.
I think I would, oh, sorry. I think I would also add something on that. If you want to look and see where to go or how to find out how to get into a country or a region in Africa, it's also a good idea to look at language and look to see where you can connect, because some countries may not be English speaking or French speaking. And if you're only a French speaker or you're only an English speaker, then you might have limitations there. Most countries in Africa do have multi-languages. So there is a good possibility that you can find different regions to tour. I would also say do your own research about genres of music and how you might connect with music forms. Like if you were playing a certain type of music here in Canada, like a folk music, for instance, let's say you're a banjo player, you might want to connect in somewhere like Mali or West Africa, where there's the instrument, an Ngoni instrument, which is the root of the banjo. So you can actually find direct connections through that. And by connecting with even artists in those regions, that's a really good way to get into it. As Hind was saying, organizations, whether they're governmental or they're just businesses, there's so many different opportunities. But also, I know a lot of artists here in Canada, even folk artists, that have connected with artists in Africa first, and they've done little collaborative work together, either on each other's albums. That's a good way also to outreach. And I know that for East Africa, if you're looking at travel or touring, Ethiopia is a gateway also. They have many flights and daily almost all over the continent. They've just rebuilt their airport. It's really a beautiful airport. It's well positioned for many places in Africa, and it's also very, very reasonable. And the other thing is they fly right from Toronto direct to Addis Ababa. It's only about a 12-hour flight, and they're usually, I fly there all the time on that airline, and they're almost always on time without cancellations. So that's another good thing. And I know the Air Maroc also out of Quebec is very reliable and a good airline. So there's possibilities for getting over there, easily, and things like that. So I think artists have to also do a little bit of research on regions and what they're doing and playing. And it's very easy to find people.
Thank you. That's great. Also an airline that's almost always on time. That's like a unicorn. that's yeah, that's very wonderful. So yeah, when I wanted to, I was just going to hop in to preface that, because you both have like expertise in different regions. When I say, I will say like generalize and say Africa, but just don't feel like you have to actually do that. Please just feel free to speak about the region and country that you specialize in. So my next question is, that being said, a little take some looking outside, I guess, a bit. If you were to tour, let's say, as Morocco as an example, what is the best way to be traveling from place to place? Would somebody rent a car or get a driver, or is it more of like a flying? What are some of the kind of nuts and bolts about traveling within the region if you have multiple dates there?
Well, but Morocco is not as big as Canada, so you might want to fly if you are going like further east or south, but you will probably be able to drive almost anywhere in Morocco. So that's very easy. We have the highway. It's very convenient to drive, especially if you are traveling with your backlight or like with your instruments. It might be easier. Of course, if you are going to more in the south, like Dakhla in Morocco, it's like 12 hours drive, so it's not very convenient. But this is very exceptional. Like most of the time, most of the venues and the festivals are within like driving distance. I just want to mention something though. There is something very specific to Morocco. I don't know if it's the case elsewhere, but we have most of festivals would add a clause of exclusivity to their contracts, which means that you won't be able to play within the same in the same city or within like 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers, which it might be, not very convenient if you are planning to perform another date in the same city in a club or whatever. So this is something to keep in mind, especially if it's a ticketed concert. So they don't want to lose, their audience and people go to watch you somewhere else. They want to, really capitalize on the fact that you are coming to the festival or the event.
Great. And just to follow up before you hop in there, Nadine, do you have like routing suggestions? Like, are there, if somebody asked me the same question about Canada, I might say, okay, well, you have like some pretty distinct regions and you might want to try touring and, doing an East Coast tour where things are close together, and then maybe try in another chunk Ontario, and then, do some big drives out west. Do you have some general routing suggestions for folks if they're interested?
There is nothing very specific. There is no formal circuit or any touring plan that is already laid out. But I would suggest going from the north to the south. We have nice festivals in Tangier. Like you can do the Tanjaz Festival in Tangier and then go, from the north of Morocco to the south. Rabat is a big spot. Casablanca as well, with a nice audience and a lot of festivals, and you can go down to the south until Agadir. And there is another summer festival that is called Timitar there. So it's
Great, thanks. And same question to you, Nadine, in terms of, and I know that your expertise covers a bunch of regions, but if you were to suggest, a country of your choice, it's not like picking favorites, but like a general idea of some like a example routing.
Yeah, I would first start by saying I know Morocco is quite organized in terms of the transportation and renting vehicles and moving around the country. It's quite good. The highways are excellent. It's quite easy to move around there. So again, that could be a good entry point for artists who are starting out to tour in Africa. I would say South Africa is a good region because there's actually a touring network throughout South Africa, and people at the South African Music Week and people like that can help on that end, especially if you are invited to their music week. They could help you to connect throughout the regions. There's quite a lot of festivals throughout Southern Africa region and even neighboring countries. I would say also, if you're looking at East Africa, it probably is going to be a little bit more travel related. You're going to have to travel a bit further. It won't be as easy to move around with cars and gear. You would probably have to fly to many places. And as Hind was saying, there are requirements for each festival. Some do have those radius clauses, as we do here in Canada, and some would not. And usually the presenters or the festival directors are the people who will actually help with that routing. They will suggest a fellow in another area that is not a conflict to their show. So that's another way to get, touring network, like to get into a network also by attending conferences within Africa or even at Womex in Europe. You can also start to connect. And once you get an anchor date, as Hind was saying, it's much easier to get one or two or three more. And you don't want to be there you're not going to be there a long period. So if you can target 3 places within a short period, it's possible. And I know there have been Canadian musicians and groups who have gone over to South Africa and been on that little network circuit. So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities, but I think it's all about getting the knowledge and getting connected with at least an anchor date. Once you have an anchor date, it's much easier to find that network. And I would say East Africa is a great place also to perform and travel. And I would say Tanzania is another place. They do have quite a number of festivals. And the festivals are within, a distance from each other, but it's totally possible. Like, for example, the one I was just at Zanzibar, they also have festivals in Dar es Salaam. It's only a boat ride away. It's not all that far away, or a short flight, maybe a 30-minute flight or so. So it's totally possible.
Neat. So we've been festivals have come up a bunch, and I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about the kind of format of. I know every event's kind of different, but I think some Canadians can be surprised that the way that Canadian folk festivals work is a little bit different than in America, or in some places, um, and I don't know if we know that the way that we do things is different. So is there like some uniqueness or like certain characteristics to festivals that maybe specialize in folk music or might present folk music?
I'll let you go on this, Nadine.
Okay. First of all, folk music is welcome in many festivals in Africa. Whether the festival is termed as a certain name or not, I would say most festivals are, unless you're looking at specifically like an electronic festival, something like that, of course, or a festival of jazz is going to be less likely. But most of the festivals, the major festivals and even smaller festivals, they're very open to folk music because, as I mentioned earlier, folk music is a lot of things. And Africans in different parts of the continent, there is folk music everywhere. So I don't think it's an issue for a folk artist to get into a festival. It would be just a matter of finding a way to look for the festivals, connect with those directors through sending the correct materials to them. And I think that the festivals are very open to that kind of thing. Now, in terms of formats and how festivals run, the festivals that I've attended in Africa have been quite diverse. And there's everything like a festival which would really mirror what you would see in Canada, where there's specific staging performances, very short turnarounds on stage. Usually sound checks are done early. There's only line checks done between acts. And I would say there's always a component of food in some capacity. Some of them have visual arts also, some have film, some have, it's multidisciplinary. And I would say in terms of how they operate, a lot of them were 45-minute sets, very similar to how you would see festivals here. Now, if you're talking about a smaller area, or let's say even if you look at, for example, like Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, yeah, it could be very, very different in terms of how it's the festival is running, because a lot of them have different requirements. They might have shorter acts, they might have longer acts, they might have less acts. But in terms of how the production wise and all that stuff, I feel that a lot of them are totally really up to par. They're well managed. There have been a few I've been at that have not been that well managed in terms of sound checks, not being on time. But most of the festivals I've been to have been very timely. And it's like in Canada, they've really run on a good, tight schedule. But I will tell you, there have been a couple that, the sound checks were hours out and you didn't really know what was going to happen on the stage because what was scheduled was not really on time. But I think that's happened here in Canada as well. So.
I am sure it has. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Thank you. Hindi, do you want to comment about some of the festivals in Morocco?
Yeah, I mean, first thing I wanted to say is that be open-minded and very flexible. You might, as Nadine was saying, find, that the festivals were run like, everything is on time, you have all what you need, like everything is going well. And sometimes, it happens. They might be late on the schedule, things might happen. We never know, but you just need to be very open-minded and flexible. I wanted to go back to the folk music and just talk to the fact that even in Morocco, if festivals sometimes have the Gnawa festival on the title, doesn't mean that they're only going to play Gnawa music. After, I don't know, 12 years, 13 years, they're not going to play the same, music all over. So what festivals have been doing for the last 5 or 10 years is just inviting artists from all over the world to play and perform with other local artists. So Gnawa, for example, they have invited Marcus Miller few years ago to perform in the stage with local Gnawa musicians. So even if you see Tanjaz or like Casablanca, don't just assume that it's just basically jazz music all the time. They have they're flexible. They invite artists to perform, like folk artists, local artists, international acts to perform on stage with other musicians. That's the first point. And the second point is, like anywhere else in the world, we have big festivals, big productions. Like Mawazin is, it's a big production. Like they have, acts coming from all over. They have like 5 stages at the same time. They have, main and big artists come in. So this is definitely going to be different from a small festival happening in some small town in Morocco. So just keep in mind that the means are not the same, the funding is not the same, and the resources are not the same. So
That's a good point because actually talking of venues, which is another good subject to mention to artists who are interested, you will find everything from, as Hind was saying, from huge stages, all the best level production to smaller venues, restaurants, theaters, Generally, I've found pretty good sound in most of the venues that I've been at and attended concerts at within the continent. But I would say that there is a lot of diverse venues, and you will get different things. And as Hind was saying, be flexible because travel can be difficult. People arriving in the airport, things get delayed. There's a lot of things that you have to really be open for and be flexible about it. It's not going to perhaps mirror what you might experience in Canada or even in the US or elsewhere.
Um, what are the visa requirements like? And is like are work visas required in the regions?
So there are no visa requirements for Morocco. You don't need, you can come as a tourist or even for business without a visa. I would still recommend just for, just in case, I would say, bring an invitation if you're coming to a conference or if you're invited by the festival, just to make it easier for you at the borders. But in general, we haven't had any issues when we invited artists to perform or even just to attend the conference. That's for Morocco.
Tunisia also had no visa requirements for Canadians, but I will tell you it is very different in other parts of Africa. Some countries in East Africa, of course, will require visas. They will also require permits. Usually the person who's hiring you or the festival, if it's a large festival or it's a arts organization, they usually assist in that matter, through invitation letters and also directly contacting to help through the process. I will say that it isn't that hard in many countries to get a visa. I was able to get a Tanzanian visa within 48 hours. Addis Ababa, the same thing, Ethiopia. And one thing that's a bit different now, this is after COVID. Before COVID, you were able to actually go to many embassies or even contact the ones in Ottawa, and they were able to process stuff quite quickly. Now, after COVID, I would say all the visas and things that I've been getting have been online. And sometimes it can be a little bit challenging because they do want certain things, but you can also just get an itinerary. You don't have to actually pay for your air ticket. You can use an itinerary for the application. And also, if you have, some do require invitation letters from somebody over there to say, yes, I'm inviting them. And also, there are some representatives, like in our city of Toronto. Before I went to Ivory Coast, I had to get a visa, and I was able to deal with a rep in Toronto. And I didn't have to go to Ottawa. So some of the embassies also have representatives in Toronto, but most are in Ottawa. And they're quite easy to deal with. I found that most of the embassies that I've dealt with in Ottawa, and even the online things, have been quite fast and quite easy to deal with. There's a couple exceptions, but other than that, I'd say it's pretty easy. And as Hind said, places like Morocco, Tunisia, without having to have a visa and have any permits or anything, it's just wonderful that that option is there.
How, I don't know, each place would be different, but how early would you suggest somebody look into that, look into procuring a visa before they travel?
If they're a Canadian and they have a Canadian passport, I would say look into it as early as possible. Some places don't require much lead time. Other places you might want a couple of months. But as I said, I was really surprised. I had my visa back within, I think, less than 2 days from a couple of countries which I was visiting, and I was in Ethiopia and also in Tanzania a month ago. And it was very easy. They were fast. I was quite surprised at how quickly they came back. And they do recommend you do it as early as possible. All of the websites particularly have very good information. And I don't always recommend using those brokers or those other websites. I'd say look directly for the government website. If you can't find it with the embassy in Ottawa, then look to the country itself and try and look up their recommended links. Some will recommend that you go through a specific website in order to get it, but a lot of times there's fees associated with that, and it's just as easy to deal with them directly.
Right. And have either of you worked with the Canadian embassies in your regions?
Um, I'm going to start because I don't have much to say, actually. We only worked with the Quebec office in Morocco. They are very active, so they have their own film festival. They invite a lot of delegates from Quebec regularly to Visa for Music and other events, so they're very active. But we've never dealt with the Canadian embassy directly. I'm not sure if they have actually someone who's working on the cultural affairs there. So yeah, that's for Morocco.
I would say also it is true through most of regions in Africa, maybe not all regions that I've been in. I've only dealt with them through having to contact people there when I'm trying to bring an artist to Canada, trying to actually assist them through the visa process. And it's very difficult to reach people. It's very hard if you're in the country. A few years ago, I was able to go directly into the Canadian embassy in Addis Ababa and deal with them directly. But it's not very easy, especially if you're here in Canada. And as Hind said, most of them I don't think have very active cultural affairs departments. I think that when we were in Massa, this was at the time of COVID. It just came and people were over there. And there was a lot of people stranded there because the airlines canceled. The Air France and Air Morocco canceled all their flights. I was fortunate because I was on the Ethiopian airline and they didn't cancel and they took us out right away. Even when all the airlines were shut down, they brought us back. And I would say I knew people who were trying to deal with the Canadian embassy in Abidjan about all this, and it wasn't an easy process. There was a lot of difficulty. So I would say from the cultural side, I don't know if an artist from Canada is going over there. Of course, it's a good idea to register as a Canadian abroad with the embassy and also inform them on what you're doing there. And I've seen them show up at events. So they might come out to an event and they may be able to provide some other type of assistance. I'm not really sure.
Great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something related to the travel and we've talked about the pandemic. So just wanted to mention that there are a few countries where you would need to have vaccines, before to travel. So that's something very important, just try to plan it ahead of time if you are planning to go to some parts of Africa. So that's something to keep in mind.
Oh, that's a great point. So, and you're talking about vaccines over top of the COVID vaccine.
Yes.
Mhm.
Typhoid, there's a lot of vaccine requirements. Specifically, yellow fever is required in most countries in Africa. I would say in some countries there's quite a long list, and also malaria pills in some parts of Africa. So health, I mean, there are travel clinics here. They can help through the process, and it's costly. It's not covered by OHIP, so that's an added cost that artists need to really think about. It could amount to $800, six, seven, $800 to get all those inoculations, as well as your malaria tablets or any other medications you might need.
Because they are mandatory when you arrive. They ask you for your vaccine passport, like certificates, to check if you have been vaccinated. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and how because I know with some vaccines, like there's quite a lengthy, like you have to take like one shot and then wait a certain amount and take another, and is there like again like a rough estimate of like when you should start looking into that?
6 to 8 weeks before you travel, start getting them. It's typhoid that requires a couple, and I think it's so many days apart. Yeah, so I would say look into it 6 weeks minimum. I've had to get vaccines within a week of traveling because I didn't know I was traveling there until the last minute. But what I would say is these travel clinics are amazing. There's a lot in the city, and they're quite good with fitting people in and helping to explain. And I would also say do a bit of reading and research yourself, because get the mandatory ones and find out what else is necessary, because I do know people who have been ill, artists who have toured in Africa, and people that have gotten ill. And, it can be challenging depending on the country you're in and the region. it can be very challenging to deal with, especially with you need also health insurance. You need to get travel insurance. The travel insurance may require you to pay everything up front. They're not going to just send you money, when you're sick. And it can be very challenging. So that's something that is really a big factor. And those travel clinics are pretty good with advice.
Yeah, that's a great point about the insurance. And yeah, obviously something that we take for granted here is our health care system, our poor healthcare system. But it's it's different everywhere you go. In Morocco and in the countries that you're familiar with, Nadine, do they have universal healthcare, or what's the healthcare situation there? Um,
In East Africa, it's not, there's no universal health care in that sense. There may be hospitals which have free medical, but it's not going to be easy. You're going to be in lineups. There's lots of people there. They may be short on many medications. And I usually bring a little kit of different things with me wherever I travel. I think Morocco is a lot more, and there are countries like South Africa, of course. There's countries that have very good health systems, and they have good clinics and good doctors and stuff. And then there might be other places where it's going to be a bit more difficult to get proper health care or dental care, because I do know someone that I was traveling with that had a tooth break in Ethiopia, in Addis, and they called the Canadian embassy. And usually, if you do get ill, the embassies are a good place to ask them, where should I go, or can you recommend a doctor or a dentist? And they're good with that. They'll recommend. If they're not open, then you can always ask the organization you're with, or if you're not with an organization, ask somebody that you know would be able to help you. And there are places where no, the healthcare is not going to be very good. You're going to have to really make sure that you stay as healthy as possible. And then other regions of the continent have excellent healthcare.
Thank you. What's the situation in Morocco for that? And
Well, I wouldn't say it's like the healthcare is better than elsewhere, but I would not recommend to go to hospitals. We have private clinics, so if you can afford to pay for your doctor, or like your doctor, I would recommend to go to a private clinic. And yeah, the doctors are competent, and you'll be able to get whatever you need. If you need, any blood work or anything, you'll be able to do it. If drugs and are available in pharmacies, so that's not an issue in Morocco.
And I mean, I had to go into a hospital in Kenya, and the hospital there are private clinics, but there's also hospitals which are better in some places. And that hospital was fine. But again, I have helped people in other parts of other countries in Africa to get medical help, and it's been difficult. And also I had to help a Canadian person in Massa get medical help who was performing there. And it was really amazing because they actually, at the conference, they had a little medical setup right on site. And we were able to access that site quickly. And that's the other thing. Like as Hind was saying, a private clinic, if you can pay, it's much better. You will get good care in most places.
And that shouldn't be very expensive. Like in that part of the world, that shouldn't be very expensive.
great. And knock on wood that nobody needs to use that advice. When if you're looking to kind of grow that audience, I know we mentioned reaching out to local musicians if you're looking to grow an audience in a region. But are there other avenues like what's radio? Are people listening to radio? Is there like campus radio? Is there like certain trends in social media that people are more likely to gravitate to?
I would say in Morocco, if you have an anchor day or if you're already performing in Morocco, you have a date, I would say, just send your information and your media press information to the presenter. And in general, festivals do a very good job at promoting the bands and the artists that are performing at their concerts. So that would be a good start. And you can also promote your own music through social media, by sponsoring, your concerts and your performance, your dates. Uh, uh, Presenters and festivals also might be able to schedule interviews with the press. A lot of them do that, so that would be also a good way for you to promote your music and also ask for it. And again, residencies and workshops, it's a very good way to meet the audience, meet local artists, and also benefit from their own fan base.
And what's the media, if you were going to do a bit of a press tour, what kind of media is kind of the most watched by the creative audience?
I would say listen to the radio. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely the radio. A lot of people listen to the radio in Morocco.
I think also, as Hind was saying with social media, because we can sponsor ads and buy ads, you can target your regions. You can put that city, you can put neighboring places, and also by inviting local musicians who are in that region. I mean, it's easy to find people on Facebook. And if you can invite a few people and other arts organizations, but usually the organizations themselves, they will have a media center at their festival or a media tent or some kind of media area at the festival. It's good to keep dropping by the area and seeing who's there. And also before you go, connect with some of the larger organizations outside of that region. Like even in North America, if you're going to do something in Africa, it's a good idea to get a hold of Afropop in the US and let them know, hey, I'm going to this place. Can you help me find any media sources? They have so many media sources and can connect. As Hind said, radio's good. Also, there's still a lot of print media in many places and television. There was a lot of TV media in Abidjan. There was a lot of people recording things and interviews, which was coming up on TV. So I would say it's pretty well across the board.
Neat. Um, the kind of mention, I think the word promoter came up a couple times. Is there like a system in place if you were to be, let's say you got your anchor date and you want to book like a few shows around that, maybe in a club or in a restaurant or, in a small place. Is there like could you find an agent that would book those shows for you? Or are you reaching out to promoters? Can artists contact places directly? What's the kind of system that's around there for booking?
So in Morocco, you would need to reach out to each one of them. Like you will reach out to the venues, you reach out to festivals, and try to make your way. And as Nadine said, like if you know someone, who's local or an artist that you connected with, they might be able to find you a date or like recommend someone. Everybody knows someone, so that's the easiest way is to network and try to connect with people who are based there or who know people who are there who can help you to find other dates.
And if it is, there are a few major players in certain areas who do kind of look over whatever's happening in the art scene and are usually a wealth of knowledge. There's an organization I know in Kenya, Ketable, Tabu, he's really connected. I'm not saying he's going to operate as an agent, but there are players and people that you can contact in various cities especially the major cities in many countries within Africa, where you can find out, hey, is there somebody there who can help me manage the tour? Because if we're looking at also management of a tour, or you need a road person or a driver, or you need gear, you need stuff in order to move around, because maybe some venues don't have what you need. So you might have to bring it with you. There are places in some major cities where you can rent gear. Not along a McQuaid, but there are places where you can get gear. And also, as Hind said, connecting with a local artist. They're always usually quite helpful. And usually if they know it's an international person coming in, they're more than welcome. I've had to call people and say, I'm missing this piece of drum equipment. Oh, no problem. I'll bring one over. I'll loan it to them. That kind of thing. So I think it's pretty wide open. But as Hind said, it is good. You'll probably have to contact most of the places initially yourself. But if you can find a major player in those regions, and most of those major players, they go to Womex. They go to the bigger conferences like in Europe. So you can always find somebody who's maybe running a festival, but he could also be a regional person, or like in Reunion Island, there's a woman there who connects with a lot of different things within the island. If there's an export office, a music export office, there's lots of people that it doesn't hurt to just write them and ask them.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I mentioned this to folks tuning in live, but feel free to ask questions. We have like a few minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, please let us know. But can we get like some kind of in summation, final thoughts from each of you? If you have, something that you'd like to add about the music scene, or maybe some words of encouragement on why folks should go tour in that region.
I have something to say before, just to go back to what Nadine was saying about the gear and equipment. So in most of West African and North African countries, we are in 220 volts. So you might need to take this into consideration. I experienced that traveling from that part of the world to Canada. So I'm just saying, putting this out there. And to answer the final thought question, Rosalyn, I would say there are several music festivals and conferences happening in Africa in general. Nadine said it several times. Do your research, check the programming, who was there last year, what kind of market you are targeting as well. Just do your research and be prepared. Get in touch with people. You can email them. Most of people would be just happy to reply and give you information, and I'll help you. That's what I have in mind.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning about the currency, because it is true in East Africa and most countries. You do need those converters and the plugs. You just see what type of plug. In some countries, there's older plugs and newer plugs, so it can be a bit challenging that way. I also would like to say and encourage people, folk artists, folk musicians, to look into it and do research and find out what fits. And I believe that folk music is all throughout the continent. I believe that it is in every country, and there are so many different forms of music within each country in Africa. You could have 60 or 70 or even 80 different forms of music. And it is something that folk musicians here in Canada should try to connect with, different regions in the continent, and hopefully they will get a tour there. And I would say in terms of currency and money and things like that, that's another thing to consider. Usually when you arrive in any country in Africa, right in the airport, you can change your money over. But there are countries which do not really like. There's a couple of catches that I do want to mention about currency. And one of them would be, in some countries, if you have currency older than 2009, US dollars are preferred, by the way. So to bring US dollars to exchange, you'll get a much, much better exchange. And also, if you have bills that are older than 2009, they will not give you as much exchange for those, as well as they prefer, like just recently in Tanzania and also in Ethiopia, they prefer $100 bills and 50s. If you have a 5 or a 20 and you're changing it, you're not going to get as much of the exchange rate that's advertised. So that's kind of a strange catch that every time when I go to the bank and I say I need US dollars and they have to be newer than 2010, they look at me strange. Why? It's currency. And I say, well, that's just the rules there. Right, Hind?
True. I had the same experience. That's why I'm laughing.
Yeah, but I would encourage people to connect. Folk music is everywhere. And there are so many names and genres of folk music in Africa, and they connect directly with many of the folk music forms here in Canada.
Where can folks find out more about the work that you both do, and if anybody wants to, are people able to connect with you if they have further questions?
Sure, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. So Hind El Ouardi, like, yeah. So I would be happy to help anybody answer the questions. I would be really happy to do that, actually.
Yeah, myself also, as Hind said, I'm on social media and batukimusic.com. You can connect with us there. We're more than happy to help or give advice, and many musicians have contacted us regarding that they would like to do something on a project or they would like to travel to Africa. And we're more than happy to be helping them on that level.
Fantastic. Well, Hind and Nadine, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your amazing expertise with everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.